Hello, pre-calculus students. I am taking today to finish lesson 4.3.2. Now, before I start these example 4 problems in front of us, if you want to flip back to example 3 real quick, I think in one class I mentioned it, the other class I did not, but in example 3, D and E were the 2 problems we did not do, I believe. So in case you worked them and wanted to check your answers, or if you want to go back and work them now in practice, D, the cosecant of 5 pi, is undefined, and E, the cosine of negative 3 pi over 2, is 0. Feel free to ask each other questions or help or ask me on Monday, but just wanted to touch base on that. Now we look at example 4, and as I start to look at this lesson, I really wish I was teaching you guys in person on this. I'm sure when you'll have some homework questions on this, and we'll probably have to talk about those on Monday, but I encourage you, give them a good try. See what you can do with them. So as we look at A, the sine of theta equals 3/7, and tangent is less than 0. That's the information we're given, and if you look back up at the directions, we're asked to find cosine theta and tangent of theta. So, we need to figure out what kind of information we can figure based on what's provided. So sine of theta is 3/7, and tangent of theta is less than 0. Let me start with tangent theta is less than 0. If tangent theta is less than 0, what are they trying to say? That is code for saying if something is less than 0, it is negative. So let's start with the fact that tangent is negative. Now, while we're talking about the fact that tangent is negative, what do you know about the sine on sine? They tell us that sine of theta is 3/7. And so that's telling us that sine is positive. So, I encourage you right now to pause for a moment and think, what quadrant does this put us in? So go back, and I'll put a sketch over here. All students take calculus. If sine is positive and tangent is negative, what quadrant does that put us in? And hopefully you are saying quadrant 2, because it has to be somewhere where sine is positive and tangent is negative. So that is helpful information to know, is that we are working in quadrant 2. Now, the other thing, sine being 3/7. What do you know about sine as a fraction? SOHCAHTOA. We know sine is opposite over hypotenuse. And if sine is opposite over hypotenuse and sine is 3/7, we know our opposite side is 3 and our hypotenuse is 7. Okay, what I want to do is I want to draw the triangle that represents this trig, this angle. Now, we already discovered it was in quadrant 2. So as I set up my graph here, I'm going to set it up to draw quadrant 2, if you will. Now, as we draw these triangles, remember, the angle is always at the origin. So I'm just drawing an angle there. And the angle is always at the origin on the x-axis. So there's the angle that we're talking about. There's the reference angle that represents sine being 3/7. We can turn this into a triangle. Do you see where I'm going with this yet? Angle is at the origin on the x-axis. I've got my triangle. We know the opposite side, so opposite my angle, theta, is 3. So that means the vertical side there is 3. we know the hypotenuse is 7. Okay. Well, we still need to know our x side, yes? Our bottom side. How do we find our adjacent side? Hopefully you're thinking Pythagorean theorem. I'm trying to find this missing side, x, because it's an x value. So x squared plus 3 squared equals 7 squared. So x squared plus 9 equals 49. Subtractor of the 9, x squared is 40, and so x is the square root of 40. And that goes up here, yes? Now, I would ask you to think, what kind of square root of 40 is this? Positive or negative? Because we go left from the origin, this is a negative square root of 40 because we go left from the origin, correct? Okay. Our job was to find cosine of theta and tangent of theta. Can we do that? Cosine of theta. SOHCAHTOA says cosine of theta is adjacent over hypotenuse, which in this case is going to be negative square root of 40 over 7. You could possibly leave it like that, or do you see what I see with square root of 40? Square root of 40 has a perfect square in it. 40 is 4 times 10. Square root of 4 is 2. So I could also write this as negative 2 square root of 10 over 7. That is our cosine theta. Tangent theta. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So this is 3 over negative square root of 40. If I simplify that, it's 3 over negative 2 square root of 10. I don't have it rationalized in my notes. You could rationalize it by multiplying by the square root of 10. But, as I said, I don't have that in my notes, so you're safe to also just leave it. Okay. I'm hoping I explained that well enough. Oh, I know one thing I want to comment on. Do the signs, positive, negative signs on cosine and tangent make sense? We said this was a quadrant 2 angle. And sine is positive, thus cosine and tangent should be negative. Did it work out right? And I would like to think it did. So all of these problems are like this. It's kind of, those of you that like puzzles, I think you'll like these. I think of it as a puzzle. It's trying to figure out what you're provided and what we need to, figure out and how to get to our answers. Okay. Moving on. Looking at B. Secant of theta is 3 and sine of theta is greater than 0. Well, if I start kind of like I did last time. Sine of theta is greater than 0. That tells me sine of theta is positive. So we have to be someplace that sine is positive. Now, secant of theta equals 3. Well, that's a positive 3. So that also tells me that secant is positive. What do you know about secant? Who is secant's partner? And that is cosine. So now we know that cosine is positive and sine is positive. What is the only quadrant where both of those can be positive? Quadrant 1. Okay, this time we are working in quadrant 1. Now, I don't know if you've caught it. What is our job? What is it we're supposed to find? We're supposed to find cosine of theta and tangent of theta. If we find cosine of theta and tangent of theta, Well, what do we know? Do we already know one of those? Technically we do. We don't even have to create our triangle. For the first one, that is, at least. If we know secant is 3, then we know cosine is the reciprocal of 3, 1 over 3. Did you catch that? Real nice when that happens, isn't it? Now, not quite so nice for tangent. We're going to have to create our triangle. Remember, we were in quadrant 1. So if we're in quadrant 1, I'm going to create my quadrant 1 triangle here. My angle going up from the origin on the x-axis. So that's the angle right there at the origin. If secant is 3, or 3 over 1, or go back to the fact that cosine is 1 over 3, then that means the adjacent side is 1, and the hypotenuse is 3. Well, in order to find tangent, we need the opposite side. So we need to find our y value. So I'm going to use my Pythagorean theorem again. 1 squared plus y squared equals 3 squared. 9 minus 1 is 8. So y squared is 8, and thus y is the square root of 8. Is that a positive square root of 8 or a negative square root of 8? You're going up from the x-axis. You're in quadrant 1, so that is a positive square root of 8. Okay, can you answer tangent? Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that's going to be square root of 8 over 1. If you haven't already, you can simplify square root of 8 to be 2 square root of 2, because 8 is 4 times 2, and the square root of 4 is 2. Okay. Was that one a little easier, maybe? I don't know. If I remember from the past, I feel like some of you guys start to catch on to these. I feel like there's usually some struggles on these. So, again, we'll definitely talk Monday. Let's look at one more here in the notes, though. Got to throw an undefined in at you. So, we're going to have to think a little differently, of course. Cotangent is undefined, and secant of theta is negative. Now, first of all, realize if we are talking about cotangent being undefined, that means there's a 0 involved. If there's a 0 involved, let me tell you right off the bat, we are talking about one of our quadrantal angles. We learned about those Thursday in class. Quadrantal angles, remember, are the angles that are on the x or y axis. So at 0, 90, 180, or 270. Okay, so we know that. As we think about cotangent being undefined. So, cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. And if you recall that bubble on the front side of the notes, that bubble says that tangent of an angle is y over x. So if tangent is y over x, then we know that cotangent is x over y. If cotangent is undefined, what makes a fraction undefined? When there is 0 in the denominator. So I don't know what x is right now. I don't have to know what x is at this moment. But I know that this is something divided by 0. I know my y value is 0. So if my y value is 0, that means I'm either at 0 degrees or 180 degrees. Which one am I at? Okay, if you're not sure, use your other clue. Secant is negative. Well, again, we're thinking quadrantal angles. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. And according to that bubble on front, what is cosine? Cosine is x, so that makes secant 1 over x. Well, if secant is negative, what do we know about x? X must be negative, because something has to make secant negative, so the x has to be negative. If that's the case, realize we're not at 0, we are at 180. And if you will, the ordered pair at 180, you go left 1, up or down 0. And remember, those are cosine, sine values, right? Okay, finish it up. Cosine of theta. Well, if cosine is x, then cosine of theta is -1. Tangent of theta? Well, it's y over x, so you can think 0 over -1, or tangent is reciprocal of cotangent. What's the reciprocal of undefined? And that is 0. Okay, guys, I tried. Hopefully this made a little bit of sense. Put some good work into this homework. See what you can do with it. Homework is page 347, numbers 21 through 48. You've been hearing that all week, but for the last 2 days, but you're hearing it a third time. Okay, guys, good luck. Help each other out where you can. Get some good work done, and I will see you guys on Monday.